The other thing I wanted to get into tonight, briefly, before we take the super chats, I sort of already talked about it. There seems to be another play that is happening simultaneously, which is to get J.D. Vance and his reputation to be saved from this catastrophe in the Middle East. And this has everything to do with Joe Kent and Tucker and all these other people. I'll be brief about this, but I feel like I'm the only one that is pointing this out. So there is a brand new report today from CNN and the New York Post, and they're saying that an Iranian source claims Iran wants J.D. Vance to be the negotiator. If Iran engages the United States at all, there's an unnamed Iranian source that says they want that negotiator to be Vice President Vance. Because they say they can't trust Jared Kushner, they can't trust Steve Witkoff, they can only trust Vance. And this is a very strange story. Where is this coming from? Steve Witkoff has a personal relationship with the foreign minister of Iran. And what's more, Steve Witkoff has business interests in Qatar, which does a lot of business with Iran. It was a source of a big diplomatic row 6 or 7 years ago, because Qatar was still doing business with Iran, because Qatar is a mediator between Israel and Hamas, between Iran and the United States. And Witkoff has a lot of business interests there, as does the Trump family. So why all of a sudden, this wasn't a request last year, it wasn't a request a month ago. Now all of a sudden the Iranians say, we'll only talk to Vance. This is that story from the New York Post. It says, quote, Vice President J.D. Vance is quietly emerging as a key player in potential Iran talks as Tehran signals it wants to deal directly with him, say sources familiar with discussions. But the White House insists only President Trump gets to decide who negotiates for the United States. The behind-the-scenes insight positions Vance, long seen as a skeptic of foreign military entanglements, as a possible lead negotiator, reflecting both his growing clout inside the administration, so clouded up, and a belief among Iranian officials that he represents a different kind of American interlocutor. While Vance would reportedly be Iran's pick for preferred negotiator, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt told the Post that it's Trump's decision who that will be, not Tehran's. On Tuesday, The Guardian reported that Tehran officials didn't want to deal with envoy Steve Witkoff or Jared Kushner, who previously led the talks. The newspaper cited Pakistani sources listing Vance as the preferred alternate. A White House official said the story is utterly false. It's an obvious op sourced entirely to anonymous sources, and a coordinated foreign propaganda campaign meant to undermine the president. The source said they want to deal with the vice president because he's anti-war.
You are just telling the just and it was what is with and you at it with not that this not and oh what's happened oh this happened I don't know your and this is very risky is risky but the fix or it's on or at one I it's so what is big yes but is the uh you feel the is that how was but is reality that they what or without and doesn't want he what and why say what is done the next say that it the oil and was a or that is it's called that to be is the guy got all guys all guys is that was for one six plus one that you are one but is my and is my and when so open say yeah and that's what people you confidence that it is not like when this is part start that was said said to our I also guys I also with so we got that you yes it's that giving the some thing you or saying it how say you when start to be that world of you guys that is called with uh with CNN they make the system that my love this is talk I know but well this of the called a bit let's say your uh, I uh, uh, again. So for the last accident, like look up, like this song, yes, I was because you guys, like, and you know, it's at the kosher because being that my dog you to so I'm so yeah, people know my life that we he he had that that for Canada for a lot to get to get into but now the most probably to but or not and yeah free is and free free that and to live like 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 the kids like see like no one just I to show that and what um on thing as what the have the people who is one thing they have what can về chỗ là đã lên tiếp đến we có is the of is so but late is in point got and then get up to just America but it's here but it is not if Israel talk what going on is to be and to it that for is on people that on oh but they can and I tell you stop if stop you without that not of you don't want to that without the way can this is and sexual in different to see is they got yeah what Vance. That's good to see because is gonna like that in is and that
Super interesting. So who is the Iranian and Pakistani source? We'll only talk to the fearless and noble Vice President J.D. Vance because he's America first. He's anti-war. That's not true at all. First of all, that's not true. That's not true. J.D. Vance went to a restrainer think tank in 2024 and said, I'm all for America first, but we need to bomb Iran. So that's not even true, by the way. The New York Post and CNN are reporting that unnamed Pakistani and Iranian officials are telling us that Iran will only negotiate with Vance because he's anti-war. We can trust him. We can trust him. He's not a neocon. He's not with Netanyahu. He's not a nation builder. Really? Because J.D. Vance went to the restrainer think tank called the Quincy Institute, funded by Soros and the Koch brothers. It's an anti-war think tank named after John Quincy Adams, I believe. And this is a think tank where their ideology is foreign policy restraint. And Vance went there and told them, I'm all in favor of America first. We should stop funding Ukraine, he said, but Israel's different. We should fund Israel, and we should fund them and give them material to bomb Iran. Then, months later in July at the convention, as you know, the first interview he gave after getting the vice presidential nomination, he told Sean Hannity, we got to bomb Iran and we got to bomb them really hard. And then this past month, all the sources from inside the White House have said that Vance was in favor of bombing Iran. He didn't express any disagreement. They said every cabinet member was in favor of bombing Iran, and Vance more so than others. They said, Vance said, if you hit Iran, you got to bomb them really hard. So that's not true. That's not even true. And you think the Iranians don't know that? You think they're not paying attention? You don't think they read the papers? Who's Vance's chief of staff? Jacob Reese's, who is a Zionist Jew. And look him up. Look him up. Look up Vance's chief of staff. This is how they write about Vance's chief of staff. They say that his entire staff is all tall, Aryan, good-looking white guys. And then there's one short Jew among the group, and that's the chief of staff. And that guy has been quietly reassuring people behind the scenes Vance is Team Israel. Because people are getting nervous. You know, after Tucker interviewed me, and Tucker's son Buckley works for Vance, a lot of people started questioning whether Vance was anti-Israel. A lot of the Jews did. Edward Luttwak, who's a friend of Bronze Age pervert and a member of the Israel security forces, he said Vance needs to reassure us that he's on our side. So I don't think that the Iranians believe Vance is anti-war. I don't think the Iranians believe that he's some kind of based anti-Israel patriot. But for some reason, people want us to think that they do. When you see a planted story, don't react to it on its face. This is a lesson in media literacy. This is why media market literacy is so important. So important, you guys. So true. This is why media market literacy is so important. If you read in the New York Post that the Iranians want to negotiate with Vance because he's anti-war, how does that make you feel? First, without any judgment, how does that make you feel? You might say, oh, maybe Vance is our guy. Oh, the Iranian officials want to negotiate with Vance? They don't want to talk to Kushner and Witkoff, those Jews. They want to talk to Vance because he's America first? Well, Well, I like the sound of that. If the Iranians have confidence in him, maybe it means he's not a neocon puppet. Wow. If that is your first judgment, that is the intended response. That is the response they were trying to get. They're eliciting that. They're eliciting that response. You need to think 2 steps ahead. What is put in front of you is put in front of you for a reason. When you're watching a TV show, you're not watching a portal into a real person's life. You're watching through a camera lens of a make-believe studio where scripted actors are doing entertainment. Similarly, when you read a report in the New York Post, you're not reading a diplomatic wire from an Iranian official. You're reading Rupert Murdoch's magazine making shit up. Yeah, does this Iranian official exist? Maybe and maybe not. Maybe they made it up because this is a convenient story to tell you to make you think a certain way about Vance. And if you read that and say J.D. Vance is trusted by the Iranians, maybe he's America first after all, that's a vote of confidence. Well, maybe they wanted you to think that. And there was another story that came out today. There was a story in the Israeli press that Vance and Netanyahu got in a big fight this weekend. That Vance had a tense phone call with Netanyahu over civilian settlements in Jerusalem. And then Vance's office denied that this happened. This is from the Times of Israel. It says, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance's office forcefully denies a Hebrew media report claiming he had a tense conversation with Netanyahu in recent days, during which he berated the Israeli premier over Jerusalem's failure to crack down on rampant settler violence in the West Bank. The story is completely false. The vice president's discussions over the last week with the prime minister had been focused on epic fury. The subject of this article was not even discussed, said Vance's press secretary, who, by the way, Buckley Carlson is in that press office for Vance. The Israel Hayom report that she denied was one of several Hebrew media reports in recent days purporting to reveal frustration in Washington at Israel regarding the daily unchecked settler attacks. Okay, so that's this week. Last week, David Sachs, who is J.D. Vance's political confidant and his connector to Silicon Valley, he was the first White House official, he's the AI czar, who said the war should end. That was last Saturday. Then on Tuesday, Joe Kent, who was another J.D. Vance Peter Thiel acolyte, he resigned his post at the DNI. Then he interviewed with Tucker Carlson, who was another Peter Thiel acolyte and J.D. Vance associate. Now this week, they're saying the Iranians say, give us Vance, he's anti-war. The Israeli media reports Vance is really critical of Netanyahu. What is this all for? What is this all pointing towards? Vance's people recognize that his prospects of becoming the nominee and the president are in the toilet because of this war. Trump and this war are dragging Vance to hell. They're burning the house down with Vance chained to the bedposts and his presidential ambitions with it. But him and his team are not going down without a fight. They recognize that if this house burns down, Rubio will get a golden parachute. Why? Because Rubio, as Secretary of State, is distancing himself from the war. That's why Rubio came out and said, Israel forced our hand. Why do you think he said that? Because you think he's based? It's hot potato. Rubio came out within days of the war starting and said, Israel forced our hand. We were responding to them because he is trying to defer the responsibility. He is trying to pass the buck to somebody else because the Secretary of State isn't going to stick around for the full 4 years, probably. Secretary of State usually does a 2-year stint, and I would imagine Rubio wants to run for president. As a matter of fact, a lot of the Jews do as well. Mark Levin said at the Republican Jewish Coalition in November that if Vance doesn't disavow Tucker and Nick Fuentes, the Jews are going to watch and make their decisions about 28. And that's why a week ago, 25 Wall Street donors all told Trump in a closed-door meeting in the White House they wanted Rubio down to a man and not Vance. So Rubio's distancing. His file is the Caribbean. He wants to be associated with the success of Southern Spear, Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. He is going to have a golden parachute out. If he's associated with Iran, the Jews will rescue him in 28 because he's got the Jewish money coming his way. Vance will be left to burn. Vance will stick around after the midterms when everybody gets royally fucked by Democrats controlling oversight. He is going to be associated with the war in Iran, and he's going to get no golden parachute. That's why his people are trying to help him. And what are these people trying to do? They're planting these stories, trying to steer the administration, and they're trying to create this narrative that Vance is restraining Israel. Vance and his allies, Kent and Sachs and Tucker, they're quietly against the war without opposing Trump. They're trying to restrain Israel. They're voicing their dissent against Israel. And maybe Vance is the only one that can bring peace. And maybe he'll try, and maybe he won't get that far, but that's what they're angling for. And that's why this article is written this way. It says Vance has all this clout. He's leading the pack. He's going to lead the negotiations. The Iranians want him. Maybe they'll listen to him. That's the program. Couldn't be more obvious. And it's just because of those connections. David Sachs has known Peter Thiel since 1992. David Sachs was there at the beginning of PayPal with Thiel and Musk. PayPal was a merger of Confinity, which was Thiel's, and X, which was Musk's, and it became PayPal, and Sachs was a part of it. And Sachs runs Musk's political operation. And Sachs donated to Vance in 2022. So did Peter Thiel. Sachs is in the administration through Vance, and he's Vance's political confidant. He's Elon Musk's, he's Peter Thiel's. You know who else has known Peter Thiel since the 90s? Tucker Carlson. Tucker has known Peter Thiel since 1992 or 94. I have to check my notes. Tucker says that he actually meets with Peter Thiel before he makes any major life decision. Before he makes a major life decision, he calls Peter Thiel. Tucker does. Tucker had J.D. Vance on his show 45 times on Fox News, promoted the hell out of him in 2022. His son Buckley works in Vance's office. How do you think he swung that job? Joe Kent. Joe Kent got money from Peter Thiel in 2022 as well. Joe Kent was also promoted by Tucker Carlson. Tucker is so in love with Joe Kent, he pressed me because I made him lose. He retaliated against me with Max Blumenthal because me and the Groypers made him lose. It's a network. So Sachs is against the war. Kent is against the war. Tucker interviews Kent, and they're all part of the same team. And then you get all these planted stories about how Vance is working against Netanyahu. Vance is leading the negotiations, and so on. Who funded Tucker Carlson Network? 1789 Capital gave him $15 million. Where was 1789 Capital conceived of? At the Rockbridge Network, which is a venture capital firm run by J.D. Vance. And Peter Thiel has spoken there, and Tucker Carlson has spoken there, and David Sachs has attended, I believe, as well. That's the network. That's what is going on. It's fake. So people go, oh, you got to give Joe Kent a chance. He moved closer to your position. Why? Because he got red-pilled? He's been in the CIA his entire life. People like that don't get red-pilled by Twitter. Okay? He's a CIA officer. He didn't move closer to my position. You think he's kicking his feet up, watching TV on Rumble like the rest of us? Saying, oh, gee, I got red-pilled by Tucker's show. No, he's part of something. They're all part of this, and this is a political power play, obviously. So I don't buy any of it. Anything they're about to shove down your throat about Vance, don't believe it. And they're going to bring in Joe Kent as reinforcement, David Sachs as well, Tucker as well. And I'm not buying it. And you want to know why? Because fundamentally, Vance is connected to all of this too. Okay, who did Larry Ellison put in charge of CBS News and turn it into a pro-Israel propaganda outlet. You know who they put in charge of that? Barry Weiss. Barry Weiss is funded by Peter Thiel. Her free press outlet funded by all those people, Andreessen Horowitz, Peter Thiel, Joe Lonsdale, all her stuff. Austin University and the free press, that's Andreessen Horowitz, which is PayPal Mafia. That's Peter Thiel, PayPal Mafia, and Joe Lonsdale, PayPal Mafia from the Founders Fund, just like David Sachs. Okay, so think of this. And you know what else? J.D. Vance, he was able to rehabilitate himself from Never Trumper to NatCon because he went to the National Conservative Conference, run by who? Yoram Hazony. They're hosting their conference in Jerusalem this year because Hazony lives in Israel. Hazony trained Barry Weiss. And Hazony's conference, NatCon, is funded by Peter Thiel. At least I believe. At least he spoke there. Okay? So it just goes, and ultimately, Peter Thiel works with Alex Karp, who is now going to be an AI czar in the administration, and this guy's like a total Jewish supremacist. Everything Peter Thiel funds is Jewish supremacy. You got their guy, future Moldovan citizen, apparently was in D.C. this week. He's now the events coordinator for Passage Press with Lomez, who's on the show on Blaze TV with Chris Rufo at Manhattan Institute, funded by Paul Singer. Okay, that's all Jewish, all that stuff. And like I said, his chief of staff, Jacob Reeses, is going around telling everybody, don't worry, he's our guy. This is just another flavor. It's another flavor of kosher conservatism. It's theater. And Joe Kent goes on Mark Levin and says, I never said we should stop supporting Israel. I just said we should stop going to war. Fascinating. Joe Kent does a 2-hour show with Tucker and somehow manages to avoid saying anything about Jews. Yeah, it's all neocons, right? It's all Netanyahu. It's all neocons. Give me a break. That he's a part of this. They're all a part of this. So I'm not buying that. Fuck Vance. And they think they're so sneaky. They think they're so clever with all this. Joe Kent's letter. Fuck your letter and your resignation. And you want to know how you know it's bullshit? Because Joe Kent resigned last Tuesday, and then when Trump starts celebrating these fake diplomacy efforts, which they're fake, Joe Kent says, oh, I'm so glad there's diplomacy happening. I'm rooting for Trump to make a peace deal. There's no peace deal. What are you talking about? They just want Vance to be at the forefront of the process so that he has something to say when he's on the debate stage in 2028. That's why. So I'm not buying that. I'm not buying it. I don't trust any of these spooks. And, if they wanted me to buy into it, then I don't know. Maybe they should have made some kind of overture. But Tucker brought me out to trick me, basically, because he thought, I don't know, that his wife guy shtick was going to take me down. If I just let Nick talk about women in a bad way, I'm going to make him look like an asshole. No, you just look like a wife guy. Oh, women are so mysterious because they never tell you what they want. Oh, I love when my whore wife with 3,000 bodies doesn't tell me what she wants for dinner tonight. Yeah, so mysterious. Anyway. But people are going to buy it. Mark my words, they're going to buy it. That's why you got to steel yourself. Okay? The whole Trump, it's no new wars all over again. When Trump said it's bullshit, when Vance is going to say it, it's bullshit. Trump was supposed to be the no new wars, peace president, blah, blah, and it didn't work. And they're going to run the same thing with Vance, and people are going to eat it up. Vance is going to run in 28 and say, hey, even though I brought us to war in Iran, it's going to be different because I led the peace process. People will fall for it again. So I don't trust it. I don't want anybody involved with Barry Weiss to lead